You know more about investing than you think you do, and it's because you've lived your life. Title of the essay by David Booth, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. David, as always, it's great to have you here in studio.
Well, thanks for having me. I admire so much what you do and trying to help people understand better how markets work.
Well, I feel the same way about you, and I'm excited to talk about this essay because I do feel like with money sometimes there's a little bit of an intimidation factor, and one of the things that this does, and I think you're working on, is how do you make people feel better about their wealth?
Well, I think that's right, and the key to it is, of course, understanding better how things work, and also learning how to tune out the noise.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it, and there's a lot of noise out there.
There's a lot of noise. I mean, financial services industry has been large over the years, mainly driven by product salespeople pushing product down your throat.
Yeah.
And they can be very intimidating, if you don't have a firm grasp on how markets work and why you're doing what you do.
Well, and it's important because everybody has to deal with money in their life.
Every single day.
Yeah.
It's and that's when you get to be my age. What you want to do is look back and think somehow you helped a bit.
Yeah.
And I think I'm so pleased with our firm now, 44 years. And the ideas around which we built the firm. These ideas have been going on for over 50 years now, and it's had a huge beneficial impact for individual investors. People are getting a much better deal today than when I started back in 1971.
Well, and we'll go in and we'll unpack some of those ideas throughout our broadcast. But, you think about that. You go to Chicago, 69? Is that right, when you went to University of Chicago?
Right.
Good experience?
1969, yeah.
I wasn't going to say 18, David.
Okay.
So you go to University of Chicago, 1969. And, I guess, why'd you go there?
Well, there's a revolution in finance taking place, and one of the epicenters was University of Chicago. And a professor of mine at the University of Kansas said, if you are interested in finance, you need to go to Chicago. So I decided I wanted to be a finance professor, and I headed to Chicago.
So you go to Chicago, technical training, you get into the investment business. You're there at the creation of some of the first index funds in the 1970s.
Right.
Amazing. Early 80s, you go and you launch Dimensional. And all of this is research-based. It's technical. It's data. But now I think about what you're doing, and everything's around communication.
Right. Well, totally. These ideas are, at this stage, most of them are really not challenged that much. Take the notion of market efficiency. Well, most people accept that trying to outguess the market is a waste of time. And furthermore, you don't have to do that in order to have a good experience. That idea, or those two ideas, are generally accepted now. And that's a far cry from when I got into the business.
It's really a positive message. You and I were chatting a couple of days ago, and you said, we want to turn the light on for people. What do you mean by that?
Well, we want to have people feel comfortable about investing. I think what I would say really about why we're all so upbeat about markets and investing is markets appear to work the way we hoped they would. There's a sensible relation that emerges over time and various asset categories. For example, stocks in the U.S. historically have done 10 or 11% a year. That seems to be a fair return to the investor. And for companies issuing capital, that seems to be a fair cost of capital to me. There's no theory that says what the optimal cost of capital should be, but that seems to be reasonable. Bonds have a lower return and are less risky, and then and fixed income investments, money market funds, have a tendency to cover inflation. So those are all kind of sensible relations. So the question then is, how do we help people turn on the light? It all sounds so confusing. Investing sounds so complex and uncertain, which is true. It is complex and uncertain. And so is life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I've been working on is trying to help people connect the relation between investing and other parts of their life, which is largely about managing uncertainty.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's almost. I mean, it's an exercise in communication, which to me is interesting, coming from someone who is trained at University of Chicago under Professor Fama, knows all the technical details, but you're spending all your time really these days on the communication side.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it occurred to me that, for 50 years I tried to explain investing the same way I learned it, which appeals to a small fraction of the population.
Yeah.
And if we really want to help people and if we want to change the world, we have to make it, all these ideas, be able to express them in the language that ordinary people use, rather than, that here's the R squared or the linear regression.
Not a lot of people understand that, and they can't connect with it.
They can't connect with it.
Dude, I love this essay you've written, and that was the title of it that I kicked off with. You know more about investing than you think you do. And I want to go through some of the concepts that we have in here because I think what it's going to do is allow people to say, hey, I actually understand what's going on there because I've lived my life and I've thought about it in the context of my life experiences. And to your point, it carries over directly to investing. So one of the things I want to start with is this idea of uncertainty. And I think when people hear the term uncertainty, they draw back a little bit. They get it almost like a fear response. But you've really flipped it on your head. And one of the points you put in here is that uncertainty creates opportunity. Again, it's a very positive message.
Well, I mean, that's right. And sometimes I say uncertainty is underrated.
Yeah.
People think, don't you mean overrated? No, I mean underrated. And the reason I say that is that it's the uncertainty leads to opportunity. If just think about it in life, had everything been preordained when you were born,
right?
Probably turned out to be a pretty dull life. The issue is not about eliminating uncertainty; it's about managing uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that basically involves making, the best choices you can under uncertainty. And that's really the field of economics. That's really what I studied. So that's the connection. So how do we help people make decisions about investing, and maybe some of those principles that they learn about investing can apply to life in general, or vice versa.
When you really break it down, right, you're just every day in your life, you're kind of making decisions that put the odds in your favor. And we've talked a lot about the connection between health and wealth, and if you think about health, really, right? I mean, if you don't drink, you don't smoke, you exercise, you get your sleep, you do all the things, you're not guaranteed to live a long life.
Right.
You're making decisions that put the odds in your favor. And with investing, it's really, that's all that you can do.
Well, that's right. And turning around, the same people that say, oh, I'm afraid to invest, they go to a doctor and and there's nothing much more uncertain than where your health is going to take you.
Right.
I mean, so you do the best you can. So that people feel comfortable going to a doctor and taking the judgment of the doctor.
Yeah.
Because they know more about whatever their issue is than they know. Yet when it comes to investing, they think somehow they have to be the expert.
Oh, this is a great way to think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in both cases, what you want are the people that you can trust to help you with advice.
Mm-hmm.
Advice comes in many forms, and it's all part of your lifestyle. You get advice from a doctor. You get advice from the chef. It's at a restaurant. Here's how you do this or that.
Yeah.
Advice. And yet, when people think about investing, sometimes they think, I don't need anybody else's help. I need to figure this all out on my own. That's kind of, most people don't feel comfortable self-medicating on the big issues.
Yeah, that's right. Now you have to, with your health and even in your chef example, right? Like you need to know enough about your tastes, your preferences with your health. You need to know kind of what's going on with your body, what you're trying to accomplish, where you're at, and all those things. But it does get to that point where it's okay to bring in some advice, to bring in some help. And when you put that combination together, that's when you can have real success.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, if I kind of have a paper cut on my finger, I'm not going to go to the doctor
You
for
got that one covered.
Got that one covered. So, but it's on issues that are really complex and highly uncertain, and where the outcome is really important. Those are the kind of things that you may want to
Yeah.
sit back and get some advice.
Right. Right.
The other thing about advice is the things in investing, the number of issues you need to consider are they're incredibly large in number.
Yeah.
They're in terms of skills that you need, the functionalities you need to invest. Things like insurance and estate planning and taxes and how much salary you make and all these. You can't be experts in it. Nobody can be an expert in all the fields.
Yeah.
So that's having people that can help you pull all these things together can be very valuable.
Yeah, I believe that. It's interesting. That really starts to get at this sort of intimidation factor of money. And what I find sometimes is that as people's lives become a little bit more complicated and they have more needs with their wealth and with their money, sometimes people almost put their head in the sand because of that intimidation factor.
Right.
Right?
Well, no, that's right. And yet they wouldn't hesitate if a doctor gives them a prescription. They go, okay, I don't understand, all the chemical reactions in here, but I'll try it. See how it works.
It's interesting. Your body's kind of telling you stuff, and so then you go to the doctor, right? And so how do you kind of have that perspective with your money and with your wealth to say, I understand enough, but now maybe I need to go get a little help?
Well, your body is always moving kind of towards equilibrium. If you have a cut, it tries to heal it itself.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
Sometimes there are problems that are too severe that your body can't handle, but by and large, it does an amazing job of moving towards a positive outcome, which is, in my view, the way stock and bond markets work as well.
Yeah, that's good. You said something a couple of minutes ago, which I really like, which is evaluate the quality of your decisions and not so much the outcome. And is that because no matter what, there's kind of a randomness to life, and all you can do is have the best inputs?
Well, that's what I mean by uncertainty.
Yeah.
If you always won, then it isn't uncertain.
Right. Yeah.
It's so it's. But here again, let's talk about moving from life right into investing. I think the worst year for a stock market was down in the Depression, something like 40% or something. Okay, well, for a lot of people, losing 40% in 1 year would be a catastrophe.
Right.
So there's ways of dealing with that. Number one,
Yeah.
maybe put half your money in stocks.
Yep.
Something.
Yeah.
So you can deal with it that way. And that's the beauty of markets that we don't even have in personal life so much. If you look at individual stocks, for example, they can go to zero. The stock market is not going to zero. It's
If the stock market goes to zero, we may have bigger problems.
yeah. Well, that's what would make it go to zero if you have some sort of severe problems. Anyway, those are kind of little things for people to chew on to help them feel more comfortable. But the underlying theme of this whole notion of FAMAs, of market efficiency, it applies a lot of different ways. But the research indicates that everybody can have a good experience because everybody can buy market portfolios.
Yeah.
And it's and if you choose your market portfolio you want, and don't invest. Figure out the ratio of risky to riskless assets. There you are.
Yeah. It is interesting, though, coming back to some of your points that you make in this. I mean, do you feel that your objective, Dimensional's objective, it's coming back to turning the light on to people, that if they understand some of these concepts, it gets away from being sold a product that may not be the best for them, fighting against the market, doing all of these things that we would say probably take you away from a good investment experience.
Well, that's right. Look, the reality is it's very difficult to find a 10-year period where stocks lost money.
Yeah.
Stock market. Individual stocks, here again, can be all over the lot. But focusing on market portfolios, which is what we do, you just can't. there aren't any disaster scenarios for the stock market.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've had disaster scenarios, a couple of world wars and rapid inflation, deflation, the financial crisis, COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all in the data.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a miracle.
Right.
So I think of the stock market as being one of maybe the eighth wonder of the world, where you have millions of investors coming to the marketplace every day on the buy side and sell side, very sophisticated people on both sides. And these very sophisticated people, they don't trade unless they think they got a good deal.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, prices have to settle at fair levels, at fair prices. They don't have to. That's an empirical question. The market behaves as though they do.
Yeah. I feel like, I've been in Dimensional 15 years, and I feel that when you really start to embrace some of these principles that we're talking about, some of the things you wrote about in here, embrace uncertainty, flexibility adds value, tune out the noise, it's almost like you sit above all of this chaos that everybody else worries about. It doesn't mean that you're not a citizen of the world and you're not thinking about it, but when it comes to your money, it almost feels like you sit above it in terms of a worry.
Well, yeah, let's go back to a medical example. You have a problem, you some sort of headache or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
A doctor figures out what the problem is and gives you some pills or whatever. You solve the problem, and all of a sudden you feel a little more relaxed. Before you had a lot of anxiety, and
Yeah.
now you have, once you get the pills, even before it works, you start feeling better because you've done everything you can.
Mm-hmm.
You had expert opinion tell you here's what the answer is. So, and once that happens, the big part of the benefit you get right away, even before the medicine kicks in.
Oh, yeah. The sort of the mental, the emotional
You're
benefit.
right, and
Yeah.
that's what we're really talking about. Are you saying above the fray? It's once you understand that markets, based on 100 years of data in the stock and bond markets, we can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, but we have a strong belief in over the long haul that prices will get in a way that you'll get a fair return for the level of risk taken, as long as you have well-diversified, low-cost
Yeah.
portfolios.
A couple of things that you can control, you
Yeah.
focus on. But, going back to your long-term example there of we've lived through a lot of conflicts, a lot of wars, inflation, deflation, technological advancements. It really is those people that do flip it on its head and embrace uncertainty that have done well as investors.
Well, that's right. I mean, I take great comfort. I don't try to outguess the market.
Right.
And there's no evidence people can time short-term moves in the market. And so I like the idea that everybody in the stock market is working for me.
Yeah.
I mean, they're out there, everybody's negotiating. And
Right.
what comes out are prices that I'll accept.
Yeah.
I'm going, that's a heck of a deal.
That's a heck of a deal. Everybody's working for you. And also you've made this concept of the beauty of public markets. And I love when you say that. What do you mean by the beauty of public markets?
Well, it's just that. I mean, in private markets, I'm not complaining about private markets. Dimensional is a private.
Right. It's a good
privately held.
example. Yeah.
So, but think about buying a house. It can be stressful. You have Zillow and things that give you a rough idea of what the house is worth. But you don't really know what's behind the walls and so forth. And you negotiate a price. And you don't know if that price is too high or too low. You just do the best you can. Well, I take great comfort in the wisdom of crowds in the stock market where everybody has similar information. And there's lots of trading volume. I think that it's unlikely that prices can be too far away from fair values.
It's almost like you've got this partner in the markets that's working for you as your journey through life.
Yeah, that's really what I try to convince people of, and that's a tough sell because day to day the markets look chaotic.
Yeah.
It looks like it's all chaos, and to say no, well, I know it looks like, and day to day, that's probably the best description is chaos, but underlying that is an order that comes out over the long haul. There are two parts to the story, really. One is that this is how markets work, and two is convince people if you can accept that, then your life will change for the better. And when you go home at night, instead of tuning in on some financial show, you can play with your kids a bit more because you know you've done everything you can. You've worked with an advisor, say, and got a sensible portfolio put together that you think is reasonable, and you know there are going to be ups and downs, but you've done everything you can. That's all you can do.
That's all you can do in life. That's all you can do with investing. And it's a very liberating feeling when you realize that a lot of these things that maybe you have been stressing out about around your money, you don't have to.
Yeah, right. Like I've often thought about that in parenting. People often try to give you advice on how to deal with a 2-year-old. I go, man, you never had a 2-year-old. If you think you have any control over that,
That's a lot harder than being a successful investor.
Yeah, so control what you can control. You can't control the 2-year-old behavior. You can't control the stock market.
Yeah.
But you can control how much risk you take in the market.
I love that. David, bigger purpose for Dimensional. I mean, like what do we stand? What do you hope for? What do we stand for?
Well, it's what we've always stood for, and even going back to when the light was turned on for me in FAMA's class, my very first class in Chicago was a FAMA's class, and you learn from all this research is a deep understanding of how markets work, so that people can make better informed choices. That's the objective of the research. And sitting there, I realized, hey, look, it's great that all these academics are doing this great research, and it's really important. But if nobody uses it, it's not important. Mm-hmm. So it takes a team here. It takes people doing good research, and it takes a firm like ours to implement those ideas and implement them well. Just because you're good at research doesn't mean you'll be good at managing money, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong between the blackboard and your portfolio.
Well, and I've heard you say that before, that you think about like medical school, and a lot of the doctors study the same medical books, but some are just better doctors.
Some are just better doctors. At the end of the day, it's about execution.
Yeah.
The ideas around which we built the firm are pretty much in the public domain.
Right.
I think we interpret them better with our access to these leading academics. I can't imagine anybody can interpret the data any better than we do. And if somebody did and came up with an idea that was even better, we'd use it. We're not wedded to any particular idea. We're wedded to the idea that we'll do what's best based on the information we have that's available. And so that's so our objective is to make people's lives better. It sounds corny, but if we have these ideas, if we can help people understand these ideas better, then they can end up with a better informed choices and a better long-term experience.
And I think that's what it's about. And I think the title of your article just sums it up perfectly. Again, you know more about investing than you think you do. And this is also part of a whole series of essays you've been putting out around life invested.
Right. Yeah, and one of the principles is, plan, don't predict is the idea. Most people, you could have known 30 years ago where you'd be today or where you'll be 30 years from now. So it's not about predicting. That's not the way you evolve through life. It's coming up with a sensible solution for whatever it is you're doing, and then pay attention and look at the results. Sometimes it works out really well. Sometimes it doesn't work out well. And adapt to it. Be flexible. Rethink, your situation. And as you go through life, you'll have any number of transitional moments. From getting out of school to starting a family or whatever, to retiring, and all of those. Every step along the way, you need to think through all these issues, and the solution you come up with today may not be the solution you come up with in investing 30 years from now, but that's okay. But if you make well-informed choices all along the way, the thing about uncertainty, you're probably going to be okay. The thing about uncertainty is, we like to think of as half the time you win, half the time you lose on things. Now, in life, you can handicap it. You can be better than that. I mean, going to college, you're probably going to be better off than if you didn't go to college.
Mm-hmm.
So, so you can have a bias in your favor. So, and you don't want to. We're not saying you can't try to predict anything. If you order a sandwich at the sandwich shop, you can predict probably, if you've been there before, roughly how good it's going to be. Sometimes you're disappointed, but it's about coming up with the best solutions, the best plan you can. Then it's about implementation of that plan, and that's where we come in. There are things we can do as a professional investor that individuals can't do on their own. I mean, we have a couple hundred people, executing portfolio trades every day for, it's very complicated, sophisticated stuff, and we can, individual trades we can do a little better than you can probably do on your own, and that adds up over time.
I like what you're talking about here because, to me, what you're really describing is this idea of journey versus destination in life. And I love it. I mean, all of your concepts just string together, which is there's going to be uncertainty, right? Plan for it, but don't try to predict it. Along the way, be flexible, control what you can control, and then also along the way, learn to tune out the noise. And this is like this investment journey and this life journey that you're going down.
I guess noise to me investment noise is people making a prediction.
Yeah. Yep.
To me, that's just noise.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the markets are going to go up and down. I don't call that noise. I mean, that's just the way markets work. But having somebody approach me and say, "Look, I can eliminate that uncertainty," I just don't believe it.
I would agree with you on that. Markets are going to go up and down, and that's kind of what they do. Markets go up and down, but they tend to go up a little bit more than they go down.
They go down, and it comes out over the long haul in a very sensible order.
Yeah.
Stocks do better than bonds do better than inflation, and so forth. I mean, that's pretty cool.
I would agree with you on that. David, thanks for taking some time to run through some of these concepts. I mean, just hugely, hugely powerful. And I love what we're working on here at Dimensional, which is what I think getting people to just feel better about their financial situation and the journey that they're on.
Well, that's what motivates me. It's people sometimes say I'm an optimist. I think I'm a realist. This is the way markets work.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a differentiated voice from, I think, a lot of people that are out there in the investment world. So thanks for the time. Thanks for everything you do.
Very good. Thank you.